All right, guys, welcome back to another Conscious Conversation. This is episode number 35, and in today's episode, we're going international. Joining me all the way from Canada. Which part of Canada are you from? Nova Scotia, which is on the east coast, is the lovely Lucas from Range of Strength.
We're sitting in child's pose for a long time. So I had to go deeper, and I started going to gymnastics route, because gymnastics, strength training, it's heavily based in strength training itself. And I can really relate to that as a powerlifter. I related to, I got the book Overcoming Gravity. A friend introduced me to it, and he wasn't even really talking about flexibility. I was just trying to get in better shape at the time. And he was like, you'll love this book. It really connects with what you're about, strength training and stuff. And it really did. I understood it, body weight training in a different way. So I started getting into that, and then gymnastics has a heavy focus in flexibility. So then I found gymnastic bodies, and there was just a huge community of people trying to get flexible. I think that was what I needed, is a community of people that were searching for answers in other avenues and other ways. And the workouts I did with gymnastic bodies were they were good. They were introductory based. It was pretty limited in its way of breaking it down for a new user, or giving you a path of if you can't do this, do this. It was just a workout. You just tried to keep up. So, I did the best I could at that for probably about 6 months. And then that led me to Kit Lachlan, Emmett Lewis, and these other leaders. Well, those were the two leaders basically that were teaching flexibility in a way that it had never been presented to me that way before. And I started making the connections again to strength training and flexibility work. And that's kind of, I think, where we come now to Range of Strength. And that's really what Range of Strength represents, is my journey, which is different. And we all have our own journeys, and we all share it in a different way. We're influenced by a lot of the same people, but in how we share it, usually can impact a lot of people in a different way. And I think the psychology behind Range of Strength is what is making a big impact on people, because there's, I think, a lot of people out there that were like me that are just there's no way I can ever get flexible. And they love strength training. They absolutely love it. And I think as strength coaches, we're always going to try to get people stronger because we know the benefits of strength. And it's just knowing the different ways we can do that. And if we can get someone stronger in flexibility, it's the options are endless, man.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a couple of things that you mentioned there, and I want to talk about it. So it's interesting how you've come from a powerlifting background. Now, most people that get into flexibility training, generally speaking, like you said, either grow up learning it through gymnastics schools and conditioning it from a young age, or they come from more of a desire to learn movement or handstands. And as the movement community became bigger, from the periods of about 2016 to about 2018, there were more people desiring to become more flexible. And it's really interesting that you mentioned gymnastics bodies, because that was the first sort of protocol I turned to as well. And I found the sort of the system of doing this thing and then doing that to see the progression, it didn't really work. And some people I know that have tried gymnastics bodies, it has given them the results they wanted, but I felt as though they came from more of already a predisposition towards flexibility anyway. So obviously there are two ranges. There's flexibility on one extreme and strength on the other extreme, and most people usually fall towards one side or the other side. And there's only a few rarity that are literally in the middle. And I found that a lot of people that did the gymnastics bodies protocol generally fell towards the flexibility side, generally did gymnastics at a young age for a couple of years and then gave it up, and then picked it up many years later. And I directly trained underneath Ido Portal. So when Ido was massive in 2016, I actually trained underneath one of his top students, one of his apprentices that were based in Texas. And I did a 12-week program with him, and I really started to understand flexibility in that aspect with PNF contractions, using overcoming isometrics and that kind of stuff from Emmett Lewis. And yeah, Emmett Lewis was my first sort of teacher that I turned to, and I think Tom Merrick. I don't know if you've talked to Tom Merrick about. Yeah, so I knew Tom when he had, I think, about 2,000 subscribers. And yeah, it was really interesting the journey that he's gone through. It's something that I went through at the same time. It just, I obviously didn't make my stuff public, whereas he went on to YouTube and he really made a thing of it. And yeah, I saw a podcast with Emmett and Kit, and that really introduced me to the world of Kit Lachlan and how it's funny because a few months ago, I messaged Kit Lachlan on his Stretch Therapy Instagram page, and I sent him a massive message, and I said, it was interesting. Everything that Kit Lachlan mentioned, I already experienced that through my experimenting of my flexibility. I just didn't have words and scientific backing behind what I was experiencing. So for me to explain it to someone, I want you to obviously contract these muscles, and then through that process, I want you to relax and go deeper. I just couldn't really have, I didn't have a framework to obviously explain it to people. And then as soon as I was introduced to the world of Kit Lachlan, I was like, there it is. Everything makes perfect sense. So I came from an Indian background, so we were already squatting anyway. And then flexibility for me. So I think when I was mentioning to you about the two extremes, I think I'm one of the rarity that's very fortunate that I sit right in the middle. So if I train strength, I gain strength really quickly. If I train flexibility, I gain flexibility really quickly. And I find it hard to lose those two things. So when I was training for the pancake before I got injured, when I was telling you a week ago, I found it very comfortable to do it. But then I found a lot of students that were really struggling, people that didn't have a background in flexibility. And I actually learned in the last 3 years, I've learned more about flexibility and strength training from watching my students than I've ever done through training myself, because I realized that I didn't have those limitations. So I found this entire journey really fascinating. And what I really love about the people that are the advocates, like you, Kit, Emmett, Tom Merrick, all these people that are advocates of flexibility, is it's an open community where we share information and we expect you to use that information, share it, but also build upon that information and also share that back to the people that have given you the information. Whereas I found the movement community, and again, I don't want to put names in here, but I found their approach too constrained. It's like what Emmett once said about the circus community, where all the secrets were kept in the circus community and nothing was leaked out. And I felt the same approach was happening to the movement community, where all the movements were based on capoeira and obviously all the movement stuff, but no one was willing to share the information out unless you were part of that exclusive group. I don't know if you ever experienced that for yourself.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't even know if sometimes it's meant to be that way, but because there is some power behind that, that's like has a bigger impact. Like if you have to be a part to get the truths and get the answers, then you're going to buy in more. But if you also know that you can just find the answers, and are you going to actually be accountable to that and take action? So I think there is some benefit to kind of keeping it in a circle where you get buy-in if someone actually commits to that circle. But at the same sense too, when we're talking about, I think something like flexibility, I don't think flexibility is as complex. I think that movement, I got involved in that too, and it is pretty complex. You got to go pretty deep to understand all of it, and you got to really commit, and which you do with flexibility as well. But once you understand it, flexibility, it's not super complex. You just have to actually do the work. And then I think that's when the community needs to come in, and I think that's what's really missing in flexibility training. We're creating it in real movement through range of strength. Like we have communities of people that are trying to get their splits, trying to improve their flexibility, and that has more impact on them. Like you're going to do more, you're going to I guess try harder when you're involved in a group that actually care about you trying harder, or that you feel accountable to. And I think that's where things clicked for me. I think at the start, even though those gymnastic bodies workouts were pretty plain and simple, we were a strong community that were looking for the answers.
Yeah.
It came down to like the biggest expressions of range. It was like the splits and the bridge. And then, that was kind of like how we had to like go deeper to figure out how do we actually obtain these things or go further with them. Um, so I do think, yeah, there's some importance to that circle, and most people have their circles. Kid has stretch therapy circle, and
Yeah.
Emmett has his mobility, M3 and handstand factory circles, and bodyweight warrior has a circle, and those, I think those things are important for us to create in order to make a bigger impact for sure. So yeah, you're definitely on the point there with those comments.
It's definitely been an interesting journey. So, if you were going to introduce flexibility to a person that was completely new to it, there's a misconception that flexibility involves obviously stretching all the time. But I think what people don't understand about flexibility is if you truly understand it, it's actually strengthening the end ranges. So, how would you define flexibility, and how would you try and almost like tell someone that maybe you should actually work on your flexibility as opposed to always thinking about strength in the terms of the spectrum that the mainstream thinks about strength?
I think, like, for me, it's always been about getting buy-in. And when we want to get buy-in with someone, we have to relate it to what they already know. And that's what
Right.
happened with me. Like, when I started understanding that body weight training and flexibility training was the same as powerlifting, basically, just different exercises and different ways of doing it. Like, I had that buy-in. So I do think that that's how we can make a bigger impact with people. What I've found with people that turn to flexibility is they start turning to it when it's like their last resort, which
Hmm.
is kind of a bad place to be. I mean, that's what happened with me too. But usually, when that's the case, there's a component of conditioning that's required to get flexible. You're not just going to get flexible. Like, and some people even turn to flexibility training because they, it's kind of sad to say, but they don't want to work hard. Like,
Hmm.
the hard workouts are hard. And like, they're like, I don't want to like work too hard. I just want to feel good. And it's like, well, you kind of have to work hard to feel good. Like,
Yeah.
too, like, if
Yeah.
you're not in good shape, if your knees hurt, yeah, there's this conditioning component to it. So some people really connect with that though. Like, and they do when you present flexibility like that, like you have to actually condition the joints you're trying to get more range in. And that's part of it. And I think that's a good place to be, because then all of a sudden someone can start getting themselves, if they're at the very low level and they're not in good shape, they can start getting themselves in really good shape. And the same goes for someone who, the broken athlete. That's often the case too. A broken athlete says, okay, I'm gonna figure out how to get more flexible. And it's like, again, you can reword the whole conditioning process. It's like you have to recondition this part of the body that was injured. So I think that is definitely something that we have to consider when we're working with someone who wants to get more flexible. It's not just stretching. There's a conditioning side to it too, for you to actually, if you think about moving to a greater end range of high intensity, you can't do that unless you're conditioned, right? So like, yeah, the splits look cool, but if you can't hold an isometric side split with a really good form and shape, there has to be some conditioning broken down through the groin adductors before you even think about those stages. Those stages are missing in coaching. They really are. And that's why you have a coach who specializes in flexibility, because they know the full end of the spectrum. They know the greatest, positions. And some of those coaches actually, they know how to train splits, but they don't know the in-betweens either.
Hmm.
And then you have the coach that just knows the basic ass stretching stuff and thinks that it's not going to do anything but let you cool down at the end of a workout. And all those pieces in between are missing. So I think that's where we need to just get better at defining what it takes to go from point A to point B. I try to do that with the range of strength certification,
Yeah.
because we don't have to necessarily say that you should train for a splits. But if you're training a system under splits, you're going to get quite strong flexibility in, say, for side split, for example, through the groin, through the hips, through the hamstrings. Like, it's going to give you something to work towards, and everyone needs something to work towards or they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's missing the flexibility, is like, you go I mean, even in a clinical setting, it's like, here's 4 stretches. Just do them every day. When do I change? What's the progression? Because if you don't see value in doing it, you're not going to do it. Whereas if, we're trying to mobilize your hamstrings and increase flexibility in your hamstrings, and I'm telling you that these are the steps that could eventually someday take you to head to toe, even though you may not want to do it. Like when I started, I didn't want to do the splits. Like I didn't feel like I ever could do that. Like that's impossible. There's no way. But when I started, I guess, doing splits workouts and seeing like in between things, I was like, oh, okay, this is basically knees, calves. You know what I mean? Like you start thinking about how like a workout is actually with this area of the body can take me to this level of flexibility if my thought process and my way of thinking was different. And that's what happened. Like all of a sudden I started, hitting these strides, and I was like, oh, I can get quite flexible.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. I think Emmett Lewis summarizes it really well. The intention is the intention behind why the body needs to become more flexible. And I remember when I was training my handstands, I was fortunate that when I got into handstand training, I was also training with a couple of acrobats. So we were doing a lot of the hand-to-hand stuff standing up. So all the guys there were really proficient in handstands. And one lesson I really took away was, let's say if you wanted, so exactly what you said, side splits or middle splits weren't really my sort of, I didn't really need it. The body didn't need it. I just needed a decent straddle. So then when I do my straddle handstand, it looks good. And I remember doing it, and then my friend was like, you're making a lot of progress through your straddle. What are you doing for your stretching? And I was like, I don't think I'm stretching at all. Like I'm just literally spending a lot of my time upside down, and the legs are just going down by themselves. And then when I get to the end range, I feel like I need to pull a bit more. So like I said, I was doing this without even realizing that I was doing it. So I was creating that intention to go deeper, and my legs were going down. And then eventually I found that, okay, my straddle has now come to a plateau. So now I need to now focus more on doing stretches that allow me to go into the side split to pull my straddle down even more. So it was a very interesting process. And I feel like it's like what you said, you need to sell it in a way that, if someone is working towards getting a side split or a front split, and then it's the middle part that they receive the benefit from. It's not just getting to that end goal, it's the sort of the middle blocks that are in play. And I feel like exactly like you said, physiotherapists and a lot of the general sort of flexibility coaches don't have that protocols in place. How do I get this person from point A to point B and all the middle stuff in between, and they don't have to check them all off? Because I felt with my students, calf flexibility was a huge restriction when it came to pancakes and side splits. And it's something that you probably just throw aside if you didn't know anything about the sort of the anatomy of the calf and stuff. So it's very interesting that you mentioned that. And it's unfortunate that the fitness world that we're living in doesn't really prioritize the flexibility aspect. It's like exactly what you said. It's either a quick warm up or a quick finish. And it doesn't have the importance that a normal session has. Whereas the stuff that we're doing, the stuff that the other guys are doing, it's almost as though you are training your flexibility just like you're training your strength protocols, but just in different ways. And as you probably already can advocate, the soreness you get from flexibility is just as much, or if not more, than you get when you're training strength. So yeah, it's definitely a very interesting process.
Yeah. And when you realize that strength training is flexibility training, that's it's the exact same, right? Like we've created all these new terms and definitions of things to complicate, I guess, complicate it or make it more appealing for people, I guess. But I mean, in my opinion, a shoulder press through full range of motion is loaded flexibility training. Like we're training those muscle groups, those muscles and tendons to move through as much range of motion as they can and build strength in that range. And it's I'm mentoring with Dan Van Zant. I've been doing a lot of work with him this year. He presents things really well on a scientific kind of level where Strength training really is just dynamic active flexibility. It's just it's just presented and told that
Yeah.
it's this way because for the most part, I think a lot of people aren't flexible and they just really don't like talking about flexibility. It's like, if you don't know how to do it, if you can't, you know, be someone who can demonstrate it well, and you're just not going to advocate for it.
Yeah, definitely. So, what do you think is, for the average person, the basic level of flexibility? So, what do you think someone should have in order to live a life, obviously without the typical sort of problems, the knee pains, the shoulder pains, the hip problems?
Yeah, I think that's one thing that I'm actually really a big proponent on is like having kind of like standards. Like, and I think we need to have standards in order to know like where someone should be. So as a beginner, I believe, being able to fold and touch the floor is a flexibility demonstration that is quite obtainable if you're shown how to do it correctly. And it's also one of the things that people complain about the most. It's like, I can't touch the floor. I can't touch my
Mm.
toes. Um, Good knee flexion, a good base body weight squat. Um, that would be another component to, I think, to just live, really well and to feel like you have a good base of flexibility outside of what is believed to be the norms. Like clinical norms is like, okay, you can walk from point A to point B, you're good.
Yeah.
Whereas, being able to move your knees, bend your knees through full range of motion, and touch the floor, those are, you know, very, I think, human things that we're born with. We should be able to do that. And hanging, I think the ability to hang has great benefits to the shoulders and grip strength. And you think all encompassing, like anyone can build a foundation of hanging strength, and it will do so much good for their shoulder mobility, their grip strength, which is heavily associated with early death and
Mm.
things like that. So I think there's some standards there that do need to be in place for like a good base of flexibility foundations. Um, some other standards that I think I use in range of strength is like horse stance. Um, you know, that's something that's not addressed very often in the low body is like adductor groin strength,
Yeah.
flexibility,
Yeah.
and everyone always deals with that as an issue. Um, the trunk, so the trunk. There's been so much hype in flexion, like Jefferson curls, spinal flexion, and lumbar flexion is like a something that we should be capable of doing and not avoiding and building strength in and understanding. And I believe that very much the same should be applied to extension as well. Like, I don't know if you've seen that one on the Instagram or socials, like the trunk extension work,
Yeah. Yeah.
do the kneeling, which is it's a good component of back bridge training, but that range through your abdominals, the resiliency you can build in extension in your back, just awareness of your bodily movements to do that. Like that is, I think, something that we should be feeling like the trunk itself,
Yeah.
being able to extend, twist, bend, flex the trunk. That's something that is heavily avoided, and it should be something that you train all the time because that's all we do. Think about how much you use your trunk. I'm picking
Yeah.
this up, I'm twisting, I'm moving, I'm extending. And it's as soon as we're done, as soon as we're exposed to that, if we haven't been exposed to it, is when we get hurt. Um, so I think those are some good basic levels of flexibility that we should be able to demonstrate. And then I think moving again along the lines to getting to maybe a higher level, there are other standards that should be in place too. I like how Emmett puts the prerequisites in place for head to toe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like stuff like that, like before you go here, you should be able to do this, that kind of thing. So
Yeah, I completely agree with those, and I think I've put two more into those categories based on what primitive human beings were able to do. So everyone knows about the squat and the benefits of the squat, so I would throw that into the mix. And I think cross-legged, I think the seated cross-legged position is so underrated, and it's something that when you see people in the yogic community, a lot of people want to do full lotus without having the basics of sitting cross-legged. And this is where the knee problems and the hip problems come from. It's the fact that you're trying to go beyond the range of what your knee and your hip is capable of doing before you've got the basic seated cross-legged position where the hips are just slightly higher or in line with your knees. So I've started working on a particular client. We've been doing it for just over 2 years now, and this guy comes from a background of zero athletic ability whatsoever. He was a full-on academic, went to a very prestigious school here in the UK, and literally was never got brought up into sport, never was interested in sport. And then originally it started off as very superficial goals. Oh, I want a good body, I want to go through full range of motion. And then it transitioned into calisthenics. We built a decent amount of strength and flexibility through the calisthenics movements, but then eventually I managed to somehow very slowly drip feed him into purely flexibility and mobility training, and working on the end ranges. And now he's obsessed with it because he's understood the smallest benefits of increasing the flexibility in the body goes a long way towards alleviating a lot of the common problems. And I think this is what separates flexibility training from the typical strength training. I think as you go through your flexibility journey, it's not just you go from point A to point B, but it's all the stuff that again is in between. You benefit from gaining all of those goals, and you see a massive improvement in general just awareness and the feeling of the body. And I think Kit mentioned this quite a while ago. He's always asking the question, how are you feeling today? How's the body feeling? How's your gait? And I think how you are standing with your feet. And I looked into a lot of the gait movements as well. There's a old YouTube channel, and I don't know if you ever come across it. It's called The Gait Guys. I don't know if you've seen it. So those guys are very precise specialists on the gait. And if you see their toe movement stuff, the ability of the toe to retract and protract, it's incredible. And it just shows you what the body is capable of doing if it develops the patterns and the protocols in place. And it's something that we lack. So I think seated cross-legged, squat obviously. And with a squat, it's interesting. I want to get your opinion about this. I know we're breaking the typical sort of structure I've sent to you, but something about the squat I found interesting, and I really wanted to pick your brain, is for the last, I would say, 2 years right now, I've been working on this thing called going from passive to active to passive. So we start off with a squat at the top, and you put the bar on. It's relatively passive. It's not fully active because you've just got the bar on the back. Yeah, certain muscles in the shoulders are active, but in terms of the lower body, it's just you've just got the axial loading on the spine. So you're in a generally passive position, and then when you actually perform the movement, that is the active part of the movement. And I've started resting right at the bottom part of the squat because I find that really comfortable anyway. So I rest in the end ranges. So I rest at the top, I rest at the bottom, and I only activate the muscles when I'm going through that middle part. So I remember a trainer about a year ago at the gym I was training at, he actually recorded me doing it, and he kind of did a post about it on his Instagram stories. And Jacob, funnily enough, sent me the message saying, this is what this guy's done. And I was like, oh, it's interesting he mentions that. But he was saying that it's pretty interesting how the rest of the world, in terms of the mainstream, is talking about don't get your knees beyond a certain level and this and beyond your toes, this and that. Whereas when we're teaching this, we're doing the opposite. We're telling people to go into that in order to go into that dorsiflexion in the calf and the ankles. And I found that really beneficial. So going through the range of motion fully controlled, and I think I got up to about 110, 115 kilos of starting off passive, going active, controlling it all the way down, and then right at the bottom, very slowly relaxing, and then engaging everything again, and then bringing myself back up. So what do you think? Do you think that's a good thing to be doing, or do you think it maybe needs to be rechecked or something?
No, you're 100% on the ball with that. The squat itself is the most overcoached movement, and it's the most natural movement possible. If you can't squat, it's because you don't have flexibility. So the majority of the strength world, I've experienced it full on myself. Like powerlifting, everything, we teach someone how to squat who can't squat. So all of these techniques and these applications are coming from trying to get someone to squat very heavy that can't access these ranges. Like they can't access them easily, naturally. A really good loaded squat has periods of relaxation in it. And if you watch the highest level of Olympic lifters squat, it's like the most beautiful thing in the world. There's no adrenaline to a point where it's like super extreme. There's actually just points of relaxation and
Mm.
contraction at high levels. And you said it exactly right, where you talked about, forcefully kind of contracting and getting braced and ready through the mid ranges. That's when the movement is its hardest. So it's highly skilled in that sense, where we do want to feel like we can conserve our strength and energy, move well with good flexibility, and then at the right moment in time, apply all the forces through the hardest range of movement, which is the mid range. So yeah, you stay tight through the descent, and after your mid range, you relax into your end range so that you can take advantage of stretch reflex and then come out with speed. Um, so yeah, I mean, you're saying everything like that, definitely needs to be taught well in a squat. And I think it is the most over coached and cued and over analyzed movement, when in reality, I've taken a lot of people from not being able to bodyweight squat well to full ass to grass PRs with a loaded bar on their back without really squatting for a long time. So we step away from squatting. We work on, flexibility and strength through the hips, building strength into the knees, and then they can squat. Like they can actually access those ranges and move well and relax through those movements. Um, so I think that's one of the big mistakes in the squat, is the most chased thing. Like everyone wants to squat well because they want to do it with a weight, or they just can't access it like naturally. Like we're designed to be able to sit in a squat for a long time. It should feel like a relaxed position, but it's not being coached or developed in a way that increases flexibility. It's just like, let's just keep squatting in different ways, and you'll
Yeah,
eventually
or
get
change
good
the
at it.
shoes, make the shoes have higher heels and this and that. Yeah, it's interesting you say that. A while ago, I was seeing a girl who was only for a short period of time. She was Welsh national champion at the 1500 meters and 800 meters as well. And unfortunately, I got to know her at the end of her time when she was up here. She was here for 6 months, and I got to know her at the end part of her time here, and then she was moving back to Wales. But I remember talking to her about the way she was running, and all of her strength coaches, like these are Olympic level coaches, because she's going to be in the next Olympics. She was supposed to be in the last one, but I think she came a tenth of the second slower than the qualification time. And she was saying to me that, she's working on her drive from her feet and stuff. And I was like, let's go through some basic stuff. And I remember her external rotation in her hips was so bad. And I was like, the coach is not teaching you anything about just building a bit of flexibility around the hips and in the hip flexors. And that will give you the drive that you want without having to work on toe specific exercises or driving off the heel or whatever you want to do at the bottom of the foot, but just basic range of motion exercises. And she goes, this is not something that's even thought about. And I'm like, this is what the issue with the world is. It's too much about the specialist stuff and not enough about, the general practice. Like basic stuff like being able to squat will give you the drive you need in order to perform explosive movements. So, lateral jumps, vertical jumps, stuff like that. And it's all about the tools, first of all the equipment, all the gadgets, and it's all about being niche and specific about certain stuff. So how you're driving off your toes, making sure that your feet are aligned. And I remember Kit mentioning this about Michael Johnson, and I think he said it to you guys, where if you look at that one famous picture of Michael Johnson running, his hip extension is incredibly loose. Like his leg is all the way it's quite far back, plus he's fully relaxed. Whereas the guy behind him, when you see the picture, the blurred out sort of out of focus picture of the guy behind him, he looks as though he's straining, whereas Michael Johnson is completely relaxed as he's going right to the finish line. And this is something we've completely overlooked. An athlete that is fully relaxed, where the muscle definition is only coming out when he's actually performing the activity, is in a better situation because he's conserving energy. So this is something I took away from this, and that's why I applied it to the squat routine, where you relax as much as possible, you have no tension in the face. And that's something I started teaching people based on the calisthenics, which is be as stoic as possible in your face. And that's not just to look good, but the fact that you're not contracting muscles, or you're not really, do you know how they say you want to engage the full body? I've always gone against that, because why do you need to engage muscles, all of your muscles, if you're not going to use them? So if you're not going to use the neck muscles or the facial muscles, why do you need to tense those? Why don't you just keep them as relaxed as possible? And I've noticed this, how it's it's an engagement that happens unconsciously, where people feel as though by screwing up their face or scrunching up their face, that will give them that extra leverage. When in actual fact, you're burning more energy as opposed to conserving it as much as possible. So when you're performing at that top level, you want to try and be as relaxed as possible. And the best way to be as relaxed as possible is to be as loose as possible when you're doing these sort of high level movements.
Yeah. And the skill of knowing when to exert force at a high level too, right? It's a high skill rather than trying to exert force throughout. I think that's where those runners at the high level are so beautiful to watch, the good ones, because it's periods of complete relaxation and then periods of like high end force, like all happening within like a split second. It's a beautiful thing to watch. Same as
Yeah.
Olympic lifting. I think that's why it's so nice to watch an Olympic lifter, because it's periods of relaxation and complete force with crazy weight. It's a cool thing to watch.
Yeah, definitely. Right. I want to talk more about the injury aspect, because I was just saying it too. That's how I started messaging you. I slipped a disc, and that was because of doing a lot of back bends after. I think it was through a yoga injury or something. I think I relaxed a bit too much into a back bending stretch. And I think I was in there for about 4 minutes. And as I came out, I felt a bit of a twinge. And then from that, like an idiot, I was doing bent over rows, like completely parallel to the ground bent over rows, and deadlifts and stuff. And then I had a double shoot. So I was doing a lot of back bend handstands, the scorpion handstands. And that really aggravated the lower back. And through all of that, I ended up slipping a disc, or herniated a disc, and I had all the nerve problems when looking down, felt it in the lower back, and through a process of 6 months, I was very much restricted in being able to work on my pancake or do my middle splits, because any movements, rotational movements in the hip were causing problems in my lower back. Now, for most people, the normal protocol is you go to a doctor and the doctor will say, take painkillers and rest. Now, in our world, we know that that isn't the best advice to give to someone. So what do you think, what is the misconception with injuries, and what do you think the right approach is to tackle a particular injury? Whether it's extreme or whether it's very sort of subtle or minute compared to the extreme injuries.
Yeah. And I guess more just talking specifically about your situation where you're training at a high level, always is the case where it's very almost hard for us to like relearn how to do something that we were doing at a very high level, which makes it, we kind of have to practice what we preach. If we are a coach of someone, that helps someone at that, get through those stages, we have to relearn how to do those things, and then kind of set aside the fact that we were at a high level. So there's part of that process, I believe, for individuals that do train at a high level or have a high level of fitness. When they get injured, it's very hard for us to come to terms with, like, it's going to be a long process getting back to where you were, but you have to redo a lot of the things that you were really good at. So if we're talking about lumbar flexion and extension, it's going to be about the really, really, really basic things of, learning to brace again, learning to flex and articulate with your own body weight before adding weight. So I think mindset, is something that has to be coached for those individuals. And the medical field doesn't have the time for that, or they don't recognize that as being something that's important. So oftentimes we miss out on that when we're being dealt with injuries and being told to just rest and just take medication to have the pain go away. I believe strongly in causing irritation to the movement at a high frequency. I think those of us that do have a stronger background in athletics and performance, we end up doing that anyway.
Yeah.
We have to move every day. So we have to figure out and learn how to troubleshoot our own bodies. So my major injury was my bicep. I tore my bicep tendon in a competition, and I was going through the process of here's some painkillers, here's some basic physio. But every single day, I would spend time. First of all, I couldn't pronate my hand. So I would just have it laying on the table, and I would just spend probably 15, 20 minutes just trying to do that, trying to restore that ability to move my hand. There were periods of planking against the wall, trying to restore stability in my elbow. And no one was telling me to do those things. I just felt like I had to do those for my body.
Mm.
So I think that that's usually the case when dealing with an injury. Is actually not moving is actually really bad. It's a bad thing. We're creating something that's going to get worse when it's time to re-heal, or it's time to get back to the norm, what is considered normal activity. So I think that we need to know how to provide that daily stimulus, and irritate the area just enough over time, till we get to that point where, yeah, it feels like I can pronate my hand. It feels like I can move this plank down to here. So I think those are areas that are missing for sure when it comes to trying to help someone rehabilitate an injury, is developing a mindset of, expectations and relearning, and then developing some kind of, it's more of, I think, of a behavioral thing, a daily habit
Mm.
of irritating the area or moving the area, as basic as it may seem. When we're training at a high level, we stop doing that kind of stuff because we're training so hard. We're saving our energy for those workouts, and to go hard with something. So we're not practicing daily habits. That's something from my last injury I still carry with me, is I do practice daily habits. So even though I can access my splits quite easily, or in some of these ranges, I'll wake up in the morning and I'll sit in 90 positions, move my hips around, and just develop these daily movement habits where I'm just conscious and aware of my body.
Yeah.
So I think that that's something that we need to better be able to, teach people and counsel them through, is creating, like, someone who's not at a high level and gets injured. I mean, that is a huge challenge for them, because their activity was just functioning, like, going to the job, doing the work, coming home and resting and repeating. So then they're injured, and then they just don't do anything at all. And no
Yeah.
one's telling them otherwise. Like, no one's telling them, like, you go to physio and they just give you a couple exercises, but once you're at like 10%, you're out of there. And
Yeah.
that's not enough to get to where you need to, maybe not so much be at a high performing level, but to work again, like to work at a high level and feel like you can do the work you were doing before. So yeah, I think that's just where we need to come in as better coaches, and to be able to have that counseling kind of side to it, where, a lot of coaches stray away from people that are in pain, which anyone that does the work with us in Real Movement, I'm like, you should be inviting those people to come see you, because they're looking, when you're looking for clients and athletes, those are the people that are looking for you. They're in pain and no one wants to help them because maybe they don't feel like they know how to, or they only want to promote the badass stuff. It's like, oh, look what I did with this person. They can do a handstand push-up. It's like, and I did that, a post about that the other day, is like, I share little wins. Like, I think seeing someone touch the floor doesn't like blow people's minds, and some people don't connect with it, but that's huge, right? Being able to
Yeah.
share like the basic journey, like the steps of the journey, where someone can now go from like, I didn't know I could touch the floor, to palms the floor. And that's kind of like the light bulb moment where it's like, there's steps to get to, and kind of showcase, you got to be able to showcase those little wins.
Yeah, definitely. So it's really interesting that you mentioned the word irritate a couple of times, because in order to teach someone how to rehab an injury properly, you have to change people's vocabulary. And I remember Kit mentioning this about pain, and I think it was actually Liv, not Kit, when she was doing one of her workshops, she said, try and not use the word pain anymore when you're doing a particular stretch. Try and use another word, pick another word out of your vocabulary and use that instead. And then ask the question again later on, is it actually pain that you were feeling before, or was it just an extreme level of discomfort or a level of discomfort? So when you say irritate, for most people that are the normal person, irritate means that why they'll ask the question like, why the hell do I want to irritate the injury if it's already bad? So I find that really interesting how I think that needs to change as well, the vocabulary that we use. So irritate is a really good word because all it means is that you dip in and out of the injury, and anything that causes pain or discomfort we automatically shy away from, and that's one of the reasons why the pharmaceuticals and the pain killing industry is doing so well, because any sort of discomfort, boom, here there's a painkiller for you straight away. And I think it's really bad. I mean, if it's excruciating pain, then for a very short period of time, like a few years ago, I think I tore my rhomboid, and that wasn't fun because I couldn't sleep on it. And I remember one side of my neck was held up by the kinesiology tape. So in that situation where the pain is excruciating and you just can't do the general stuff, then fair enough, take some sort of painkillers. But after that, you have to go back into seeing how the body feels without the painkiller to see where you are, to test where you are. So irritate is a really good word to dip in and out of that injury and see what you've got there and what you can work with. So yeah, I think that's something that needs to change with the industry. And I think again, it's a positive rise where the industry, the more that we research into flexibility and the more teachers out there are using it, the more people are starting to understand, actually, it's not actually pain that I'm suffering here. It's just a very high level of discomfort. And I've taught it in my classes as well. I call them stretch therapy classes because I feel the whole process of limbering, the stuff that you're saying where it's every single day, even though you can do side splits, you're still doing the 90-90 stuff, the basic stuff. And I love that Kit termed it limbering because that's basically what it is. It's just you moving in and out of your general flexibility. So then, the body feels good. You're not going through the extreme levels of pain, but it feels actually quite pleasurable after a while. So the analogy that I give is, imagine that you're sat on a chair for 8 hours and your boss has told you can go home or you've got a break for half an hour. That single instance you get off your chair, what's the first thing you do? You reach out and you stretch your thoracic spine. And that initial feeling for the first 5 or 6 seconds feels amazing. So I tell people that's the level of sensation your stretching should feel when you're limbering. Not so when you're doing your, the PNF stuff and going into your contractions, but generally speaking, that's the level of flexibility we're trying to achieve in terms of the day-to-day runnings of the body. That's how your body should feel. There shouldn't be any discomfort or pain. So yeah, it's very interesting that we mention particular words. What other words do you tell your students and your clients that they have almost like a misconception about?
What other words?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think pain is the big one. Like semantics do play a big role in this process, especially flexibility. If you're getting into positions that you can't access or that feel uncomfortable. So I think, yeah, comfort is a good word. I recently, are you familiar with the RPE chart?
I think Jacob was mentioning it to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I used to power lift, when you get to a certain level, you kind of have to auto regulate how you're feeling if you want to keep pushing heavy weights. So you'd use the RPE chart as it's a rate of perceived exertion.
Right.
Most commonly in powerlifting, we use 1 to 10, but in other realms, they use like 1 to 20 because they get like really detailed, like on how someone's feeling.
Really? Okay.
So I brought that into range of strength and I just reworded it for flexibility purposes. So a lot of coaches are really connecting with that. I used it for the longest time coaching flexibility. It's because what I knew in powerlifting, I was like, we always auto-regulated. And, that's what Kit's talking about when we limber is it's partly also a limbering process is assessing how you feel today. So yeah, I want to move, but I also want to feel like, oh, my right side feels a little funky today compared to my left side. That's just something I should be aware of. So I think that that's part of it too, is learning how to assess how we feel, how our body feels, and then learning how to auto-regulate how we're feeling in our training is super important because we can't be 100% every day, and it's not a linear process. So if we can get to a level where, we can take advantage of good days, but we can also make sure that the bad days that we're not feeling so good are still something worthwhile in our training. So I like to, I guess I'm probably not a very wordy coach. I try to create numbers and figures and give people ideas of what I want them to feel. Like you should
Mm.
feel like you can hold for 10 more seconds, or you should feel like it's very easy to do it all. You should feel like you're at a threshold, like you've maxed out, like kind of create the experience for them. Like rather than saying, do this for 30 seconds for 3 sets, it's like, this should be by the end of the set, you should feel like this, and then kind of like give them those expectations of how you want them to feel, and then ask them how they felt afterwards. So I think, yeah, there has to be a relationship developed. It's not gonna, when it comes to, the coaching process, you have to develop a relationship with someone. They come to you to actually be told what to do, and we have to find a way for them to figure out how to understand their own bodies, and kind of, hopefully, if we're a good coach, we're trying to get someone to a level where they can do those things themselves. And that's, you really won if you get someone to that level where they feel like they can, you know, listen to their body and make choices on their own as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think I use a range scale as well when I'm teaching my stress therapy classes. It's from zero feeling whatsoever in the body or feedback from the body, and 10 being excruciatingly uncomfortable, excruciatingly painful that you can't hold it at all. And you want to see where you are in terms of that scale. So yeah, I completely agree with that. So how would you? This is an interesting question, and I think Kit briefly went through it in a previous podcast. I think it was the propane fitness one. I think I binged a lot of his podcasts. So dealing with hypermobility, how would you? And this is something I had a conversation with a client this morning about it, and he was mentioning to me that his girlfriend has hypermobility to the point where her elbow, the hyperextension in her elbow, surpasses the typical hypermobile limit. And I feel as though there is a misconception about hypermobility as well. I think a lot of people actually don't have hypermobility because of their muscles, because their muscles are quite loose. I think it's because their joints are just not braced properly by the tendons and the ligaments and the sort of the tissue that holds those muscle the joint together. So could you shed a light on anyone that you've had that's been hypermobile, or and how you've treated them, and what you deem as hypermobility?
Yeah, like to me, hypermobility is a specific condition, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So it's a connective tissue disorder, and yeah, the individual demonstrates extreme ranges. Joints dislocate. That to me is hypermobility, and that is what I have to, like, as a coach, you have to assess if they actually have that or not first.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they do, then the prescription of exercise and stuff has to be very much so in case for them, like more stability based prescription, very individualized. Like that would be a situation where you have to really develop a relationship with your client and develop and understand what their actual capabilities are without pushing the envelope too much.
Yeah.
And then the other end of the spectrum are the individuals that are quite flexible, but are very weak. So, and I think oftentimes those the cases I've dealt with are people that have developed a really high end flexibility at a young age, and then they continue to just access those ranges and not really exercise. So it's very common to see, like one of my clients, she was an older middle-aged woman who was a dancer when she was younger, and she just basically sat in passive end ranges after some cardio sessions. Like that's what she did after dance for years and years and years. It was like, when she accesses these great ranges, she could just sit in splits. She would just do cardio. So I think for those people, it's like they know that they can do something great, but they don't know what they need to be doing. So for her, it was strength training. Like, so we basically just worked on some traditional strength work and experimented with the strength that she did have in her end ranges. So yeah, I think the hypermobility term does get thrown around a lot, but it's very specific to either a condition, a very specific condition that should be dealt with in a very careful way, or a situational kind of thing where someone has access to a range, but they're not really conditioned. So that's where, the whole like conditioning component, someone who's not in good shape or someone who does have, these access to great passive ranges from um, activities as a younger individual or what have you. And I think those are the situations you're going to run into, and you just need to know how to define that and define, you know, what it is that you need to be doing with that person. Most of the time with the hypermobile person or the individual with passive flexibility, then it just has to be more of a strength focused, and it can be flexibility strength focused, which, is more active static based work, isometrics and things like that need to be reintroduced to them. So most
Yeah.
of the time, hypermobile people just need to be reconditioned.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you were saying that, it just reminded me of a person I knew. So one of my acrobatic friends, he's an acrobat, but he's incredibly stiff, like a very, very stiff acrobat. Really great at basing people because of that reason. But I remember he was a rugby player, and he told me that when he was younger, he used to play a lot of high impact sports. And he suffered from dislocations in both of his shoulders. All the time, just kept on, his shoulder would just pop out. So he'll have his girlfriend on his hands when he's balancing her, and his shoulder just go pop. And over the 3 years I got to know him, he said he's not had a single instance of having the shoulder issue, because what he did is he trained himself on rings. So the instability of the rings allowed him to strengthen all the ranges. So when someone pops their shoulder, it's usually because somewhere in their shoulder there's a weakness, and that's where the shoulder keeps popping out from. So when you go to a general physio and he tells you to just work on the basic ranges, flexion, extension in the shoulder, it becomes obsolete, because it only works on certain particular ranges, whereas you've got access to 360 degrees almost with your shoulder if you're able to go through that range. And he said he did very light ring work, so his feet were on the ground originally, and he was just doing ring supports with his feet on the ground, and then progressively he built up his ring work, and then he had his feet off the ground, and then he was doing more advanced stuff. And I remember teaching a very early client about this, and he came to me with the same apprehension that he felt as though his shoulder will pop out. And I said to him, just very light work. And bear in mind, this guy was a much bigger guy, like bigger in the size of fat and obese. And obviously for him, you have to be very careful, because you can easily say, well, this protocol worked for this one person, putting them on the rings. But if you've got someone who doesn't have any control over their own body weight, it becomes extremely dangerous if you start now throwing up on on rings and stuff. And I've seen a lot of movement coaches do that, and it's quite scary. It's quite scary to see these big people on equipment that probably shouldn't be used by them unless they've developed a very strong level of tolerance to the actual balance aspect. So I remember putting this guy on the rings as well, and again, very gradually we built up the strength. And like a few years later, I bumped into him. I lost a couple of pounds, but had just incredible grace and elegance. And we normally relate that word grace and elegance towards, gymnasts or dancers or ballet dancers, very sort of lean or skinny people. But I've got a couple of people I follow on Instagram, pretty big chunky guys, and their ability to press into handstands and just back bend, and it's quite scary to see it. Like, to see someone so big move so elegantly, and it really put the whole flexibility, mobility thing for me into perspective, that it doesn't matter what size you are, as long as you develop the integrity very gradually, anyone can become flexible and anyone can become strong in those end ranges.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think it's important to know how we can create those same stimuluses, right? Like a ring, having the rings as an option for someone to create, some instability training can, for them, it could be the same as just holding a dumbbell straight as their arm and giving their arm a little bit of feedback and just kind of adding those little like perturbations into the movement. But it is the human body and potential is a great thing. Like if you, when you see people who are more open minded and
Yeah.
not living in the box.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we also fall into that bracket of, well, I've read this on the paper, so obviously stretching before training is bad for you because I read it on a paper that was 30 years old. Stuff like that. And I think it comes from a place of really wanting to experience. And I think there are two types of people. There are people that will um, speak from other people's experiences, or just read about it, and the people that will actually think, oh, I need to experience that for myself. And I think we need to get into that bracket. We need to get the majority of people to say, well, I've read this, and then you say to them, well, how do you feel about it? Have you tried it out yourself? And then speak about your experience. I had a friend on my podcast a few podcasts ago, and he talked about the difference between Western psychology and Eastern psychology. And he said that the biggest difference is, in the East, if you were someone that was depressed and you went to the East, they'll take you to an environment, an ashram, and then they'll completely change your life upside down. You'll live a lifestyle that doesn't have those aggravating stimuli that causes your depression or causes the anxiety to kick in. And then they ask you, how do you feel after that experience? And then they'll go back into your depression and say, what do you think created those barriers? And let the person describe their experience, as opposed to saying, well, you follow into this category, that means that you've got this condition. And I think we need to adopt that same protocol when it comes to the fitness stuff. Instead of just saying, well, I've read about, pushing your knees beyond your toes is bad for you when you squat. Well, you have no experience. When you see a guy that can go all the way ass to grass and just sit there and then bring the bar up, do you feel as though that person actually feels that discomfort? And it really does blow people's minds. It's like, I've read this, but it's not happening here. And I think we need to move away from that mindset. So how do you think if you had someone that was incredibly stiff and had a very poor background in any sort of movement, how would you coach them to become someone that's pretty mobile, or someone who's got a decent amount of flexibility?
We need to set targets for that individual is number one. Like, what are you working for? I want to be more flexible. One of the things I say to the coach, like I've moved more into working with coaches in the last year than clients. So we have a lot of discussion about working with clients and stuff. And the flexibility client that wants to move better, increase their flexibility, is interesting in that they will say something arbitrary, like, I want to be able to touch my toes. And we can think about that as the same way as someone telling you they want to get rid of the jiggle in their arm. I just don't want my arm to jiggle. It's like, okay, well, we know we're not going to just isolate their arm and train their arm for however long it takes to remove the jiggle. There is a system, and we have to promote and take advantage of someone who does reach out to us and say, like, I can get you to touch your toes, but we're going to dive into the full system of flexibility training. So we're going to train the upper body, we're going to train the lower body, and you got to be able to educate them that how you train the upper body will synergistically move into like how you move in the lower body and those kind of things. So I think that there's that process involved with someone who's a complete beginner and doesn't even know what it is that they want. They just want to have flexibility. So we have to be able to educate them that there's an approach to this where, you have to embody all of it, not just wanting to touch your toes. And then I think we need to set those targets clearly for them. So we did talk about some of them already, like, palms of floor pike. That's a very attainable target. I do like the couch stretch because it works quite well with individuals and improving knee flexion. And then we're looking at improving trunk function, shoulder function, and actually laying out like what the target is. Like, we want to be able to. So I think that coaches need to be able to outline some kind of baselines with individuals at that level, assess, reassess. You do hear, I think it's the FRC community talks like, if you're not assessing, you're guessing. And I like that. Like, that's, of course, that's an approach that we should all adopt, is like, we got to assess what their current capabilities are, but we also have to be able to define what level of ability they're at. Athletes do have quite a good foundation. So if you can assess an individual or create some baselines for them based on like their current foundation, you can actually move someone along those lines a little quicker. it's
Right.
not that we want them to be moving quick, but if someone does already have a great strength foundation, well, they're going to be quite capable of being in, these positions and doing isometrics a little harder. And just one of the things we've had a lot of success with are the athletes that come in and they're conditioned really well. They have a good foundation, and you just present them that new style of strength training, and they improve their flexibility quite quickly because they have that foundation. So yeah, that buy-in, that has to happen where you can find a way to relate what they already know. Like
Yeah.
there's going to be a conditioning component to this. It's not going to be easy. It's going to feel like, you're going to be working quite hard for this. I think that needs to happen for those individuals. But being able to actually define where they're at. So when someone comes to you, you have to be able to assess them in such a way where you can define what kind of foundation they have
Right.
and then set clear targets on what they're working towards.
Right. Yeah, I think that sounds perfect. I think that's right. Just like again, like we mentioned throughout the podcast, just drip feed them the next goal, and then eventually, And I feel like with the flexibility training, compared to strength training, it's the analogy of the snowball. Once you get the ball rolling, it becomes very addictive because you start to realize the freedom you experience from having that extra range. And it's also interesting because to lose that flexibility, it takes a lot longer than it does to lose strength. Like if you're doing basic strength protocols like deadlifts and any sort of compound movement, and you stop training it for a certain period of time, generally speaking, you lose the strength that you've gained, and you have to kind of build it up again. Whereas with flexibility, it takes a little longer to gain, but you also retain it, especially if you're using the positions. And I remember. One of the reasons I was able to develop really good lat flexibility is because of training the tuck handstand. Just continuously train the tuck handstand where the body had to develop the flexibility in order to create stability. So I don't really work on lat flexibility anymore, but by just training the tuck handstand as just a regular part of my handstand training, I'm going deeper into the lat flexibility that I've previously attained. So yeah, it's quite incredible what you can actually do when once you've got the ball rolling. So realistic expectation, what would you say a realistic expectation is for front splits, middle splits, and a bridge for the average person?
2 to 3 years. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. There's that may turn people away, but that's probably for the best because you know what I mean. They aren't going to buy into something that's you don't want to work with those people that aren't they're constantly wondering how long it's going to take, because you have to completely embody the journey and the process. And it took me 3 years to get side split. I say that to people and they're like, yeah, but knowing what you know now, would it have taken you as long? Probably not.
Mm.
And that I didn't really give a shit the first year. Like I was more or less still doing, traditional stuff and just starting to stretch and try to understand it. But I don't regret that. And I think that that's a process that needs to happen for all of us for sure. Um, but knowing that we're talking full splits, full bridge, there's a lot of milestones along the way that you'll be very excited about.
Mm.
Um, like hitting a pancake, I think probably it could be around the same time. Like I think front splits and pancake are more easily obtainable than a side split in my experience and working with individuals. Like
Yeah.
once you teach them how to actually train for those things properly. But it's the milestones along the way that you need to celebrate. And it's the same as if I told you how long does it take to get a double body weight squat, I'm gonna celebrate the body weight squat, the 1.5 body weight squat along the way. And
Yeah.
that's what you need to think about when you think about flexibility is in a year's time, if your calves are 10 inches or 12 inches from the floor in a side split, that's crazy. That's a
Mm.
big win. And it depends on where you start too, right? Like if you do have that foundation in athletics, you might progress a bit quicker. You might be able to be introduced to higher intensity work sooner. Um, so very dependent on an individual's current ability and foundation. But yeah, you can expect at least 2 years to share something super significant. But there are milestones along the way that, you know, are quite impressive, like palms of floor pike. I've worked with a lot of people that just like they obtain a palms of floor pike and it's like they just won a championship because they're like, that I never thought I could touch the floor. Now I'm pressing my hands into the floor. So yeah, along the way, there's those milestones. Like how long does it take to get palms of floor pike might be another question that and as a coach, you need to be able to make those definitions more clear for that person. Someone who wants a split, okay, well, these are the things we'll hit along the way in that timeline. And then if you have coached enough people, when someone's hitting a stride and you can push them to maybe obtain those things sooner.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And the other thing I want to add to that is I don't think people really fully comprehend what they're getting themselves into, because the saunas is just so real. Nothing like, so with strength training, yeah, you're going to feel sore for a couple of days, but generally speaking, once you've felt it once, you never get that soreness again unless you're going for a seriously, a larger intensity and you've taken a long period out of it. Whereas with stuff like hamstring flexibility, to do pancakes and side splits and front splits, the soreness just doesn't end. And I think it's enough to turn most people away. But yeah, the rewards are great. And especially, I found really something very interesting. When you've gone for, let's say, 4 weeks of periodizing your training, so you do your sessions in a 4-week block and then you give yourself like a week off, a couple of days off, it's incredible how when the soreness disappears and the muscle repairs itself, how flexible you feel in those days, and then it all starts again, the process starts again, and it's like that for at least the first 90% of the journey. Is you see a decent amount of progression, and it's generally speaking it's quite linear. It just goes up, but then it's that end 10%, that 10% range at the end. That's when it takes almost like 6 months just to achieve that last 10%. I don't know if you found that with your training, but I found that with my pancake training.
Yeah, you get to a point, you start periodizing your flexibility training, and that's like a whole different. One of the coaches I'm working with right now, he's a kinesiology professor, and he actually presented that to the class. He said a week or so ago, he said he was talking about flexibility the way we are, and he said like, so why don't we periodize flexibility? And he said the students were just like dumbfounded. They were like, what are you talking about? So yeah, like once you start getting into that stage where you're training towards structural adaptation and changes in the body, it needs to have the same principles as other training. We need to progressively overload. We need to think about different ways to periodize our training once we start specializing more, and then we need to have periods of rest and recovery. And when you start talking about flexibility training like that, people are like, what are you talking about? I'm just trying to cool down for my workout. It's like, no, if you want to actually change, then it's very much the same as strength training. If you want to actually go from a 200-pound squat to a 400-pound squat, there's periods of deload and recovery and overload and undulation, and very much the exact same flexibility training. And once we can grasp that and apply it, we can produce crazy results.
Yeah, 100%. I just want to ask you something to add to that. Have you ever experienced this weird sensation where you haven't trained in terms of strength, you've done your flexibility training, and then you go back to your strength training, and you generally, your repetitions or your volume or your intensity has gone up. The strength that you've gained has gone up. I found that with squatting quite a bit, where all I've done is like a week or 2 weeks or maybe even 3 weeks, because of how busy I am with clients and everything that's going around me. I don't get a chance to train, and then when I come back to training, all I've done is I've just worked on my flexibility, and suddenly, because of just working on my flexibility, my strength has gone up in other aspects. Have you ever experienced that yourself?
It's been a different journey, I think, for me. Like I had 300 kilos on my back at one stage squatting. So, but I squat now better than I've ever squatted. Like I've, high bar, ass to grass squats. Like, so I think there was a lot of relearning for me along the way when I got back into strength training. So like when I stepped away from strength training and I got more flexible, I came back to strength training with a different mindset and a different approach, where now my strength training is through full range, and I'm trying to do it in a more accessible way. Whereas before it was just more about, you know, getting stronger and whatever it took to get stronger, kind of thing. So I haven't quite experienced that yet, I don't think, because I've been slowly getting back into barbell training, like as more of a focus.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a different experience, I think, for me. Like, my squat is starting to get quite a bit stronger again, and I'm trying to think of like how I train my flexibility. Like it's for the most part more on maintenance right now.
Right.
But yeah, it's quite surprising. I did have another friend of mine. He's actually a real movement member as well. He came in and he was a power lifter, and he took the journey. Like he kind of like saw after my journey what I had done. And he like was like, I'm doing that. So he got quite like lean. He's lost a lot of that powerlifting weight. He's moving better than ever. And him and I had the same experience in that now he's squatting in ranges that he's like unsure of. So now all of a sudden you're able to squat ass to grass, and now you're like, holy crap, am I like bottomed out here? Is this too deep? Like, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like a relearning process where I haven't been in that range with heavyweight before. So I have to like rethink about like, how does that actually feel, and what should I be? It's almost like a mental thing.
Yeah. I think there needs to be competitions based on that. If your bottom doesn't touch your heels, it's not a squat, you're disqualified. You know, because if you look at that, just that tiny extra range, you go from your bottom being away from your heel, and then you place your bottom down, or you rest them on the bottom part of your calf. That extra range, and then trying to explode out of that is a completely different world on its own. And I've trained with a few people. I've trained with a girl who's a powerlifter, professional powerlifter, and she says to me, she goes, "This is one of the reasons why I have to wear those Olympic weightlifting shoes. I don't have access to that range unless I've got the heel obviously tilted up, tilted down." And I said, yeah, it's really interesting, because when I access that range, it doesn't feel any different to if I didn't go down to that range. But I can really appreciate why, when we talk about full range of motion training, just the tiny aspect of having 5% more than someone else and really getting your bottom down changes your movement completely. The biomechanics of the movement and how particular muscles have to turn on and turn off just to get into that rested position. And that's why I find this whole concept of resting and then activating again really fascinating, because I also work on not exploding out of it. So going down slowly, resting, going back up slowly as well, because I feel like that reflex, the more we start using that reflex, the more we're training the body habitually to get used to that reflex. So when we get into a situation where we can't use that reflex anymore, when we're lifting a weight that's beyond our ability to use that reflex again, we get into the habit of the body wanting to use that reflex, and that's where I think some of the injuries happen. So I think sometimes it's nice to just drop the weight completely off and try and access those ranges, and try and explore the aspect of not using the reflex of the body to get back up again.
Movement obsessed.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. It's an obsession for movement than anything else.
Yeah, I'm the same. I just want to put my feet together and squat. I want to put my feet wide and squat. I want to do it slow and fast. And I think that's where we become, I guess, more movement focused, if that's, the coin term you want to use. But that's what I think about when I think about movement culture, is like just the obsession of physical movement and different applications of it. What if I do it this way? What if I do it that way? And, the better you can be at that, the more people you can help. Because if someone can't move that way, can you teach them to work around it and then become able to do that eventually? And that's a cool place to be.
Yeah, 100%. And I think with the movement stuff, I feel personally, it's great having the sissy squat and the dragon squat and all this kind of stuff. But I'm more interested. In the last 2 years, I've been more interested in saying to people, "Great, now what can you do with it? Like, what can you apply it to?" And I've got into climbing for the last 2 years, and to have access to certain movements. And I look at the climbers and think to be able to crimp, with their tiny little fingers, the tiny little nubs on the wall, and use their fingers to almost perform like a pull-up, a one-arm pull-up on that. Now, you enter a world of strength that you haven't even thought of. So it's incredible how you can use the foundation that you've gained in the last couple of years and put it to something else, and try and explore in those ranges and teach those people. Because I know a lot of the guys that do climb are all hunched over, they've got massive lats, massive pecs, but they're incredibly tight in certain ranges. So, and especially the fingers are all, flexed over and curved over. So to present them with protocols that help them to open up the fingers and the toes, it's really rewarding. And I think it just doesn't end. This world doesn't end. So that leads me on to the final question to you, mate. And that is, where do you think the industry is moving? So the fitness industry itself, where do you think it's going to be in the next 10 to 20 years in regards to mobility and flexibility?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I'm fortunate to have developed a good relationship with James Fuller. He did a podcast with us, Strongman Archaeology. He's like an encyclopedia for like old time strongman stuff and history about strength training and things like that. And we've had some good discussions. One being that, Alan Calvert brought the barbell to America and then went through a period where he got completely away from that and got into calisthenics. And then if you start looking into the history of things and how it did have the same shift that it's kind of had now, like with the industry now, like we had CrossFit exploded, weightlifting's really blown up, and then gymnastics and bodyweight training and movements become really big. Now flexibility training seems to be taking off into a way where people can connect it to different, norms and all these other training disciplines that have taken off. But I just feel like it just keeps recycling itself. So it is a cool place to be in right now, where everyone is getting excited about flexibility and seeing how it can be showcased. It really seems like there's like a really big strive towards hybrid approach training all the time, which is, I think, just human nature. We always want to push the envelope. Like, what can we do with the time that we have?
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, I think over the next decade, I think you'll see flexibility training pick up with you're starting to see some of the leaders like Dan Van Zant's really picking up a new mentorship that's really gotten a big boom and big feedback. And there's more flexibility coaches showing up all the time, showing that there's a better way of doing things. And I think that strength training will make a comeback in a good way. Like barbell squatting with range is just, or barbell movements and strength movements with the greatest range is like, it hasn't been explored again. And that's, I think all it is just a constant exploration with the new things we're learning about the body. So movement, gymnastics, it's like actually going and experimenting with those disciplines with a new way of thinking. That's the fun of it, really. It's like, what can we do with this, way of moving and thinking? And I think we're definitely moving outside of the bubble, which is good. Again, if you do go back and read to more about like the era of like the barbell, the invention of the barbell, like that was a time when they were just like making shit up. Just, well, what if I pull the bar over and press it? It's like, oh, we'll call that a pullover. And, like that would have been such a cool time to be in, because a lot of those movements are still what we do. And a lot of them we don't do anymore because we've, wanted to push the envelope of strength. And there's some of those movements we should be able to do, or we should be striving towards twisting and bending. And I think we are. So yeah, I don't think it's going to, I guess, reinvent itself, but just present itself in a different way with what we've already been exposed to, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It's the future is definitely positive for this kind of training, and maybe the industry will also move towards this in terms of the mainstream. So obviously a lot of the companies are based around aesthetics and bodybuilding and looking good, and it'd be nice to see more people really understanding their body and realizing that it's not just about the superficial stuff or how the muscles look, but how they actually work and move around. Because at the end of the day, we are, I studied zoology, so we are primates, but just primates that spend most of their time upright as opposed to, swinging through with our arms and stuff. So yeah, it's really interesting. It's definitely very fascinating. And if you ask Kit, he'll probably say, spend more time in the mindful realm and spirituality and stuff, which is quite nice. Yeah, go on, sorry.
Yeah, just I think the locus of attention.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, that's like number one when you're trying to teach someone to stretch. I was doing a handstand, and Yuri Mamerstein, I did
Yeah.
some coaching with him. And one of the things he had told me was just stare at a wall for 60 seconds. Cause I was on the cusp of hitting a 60-second handstand. And I spent a few times just staring at a spot on the wall, like even 2 minutes. And within that time, I hit my handstand. And it is so much so like our ability to actually focus on the here and the now and like what we're experiencing and doing. Yeah, just being aware like of our bodies and our physical space. That's part of the whole process, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you say that about the handstand and just staring into dead space, because a lot of people find that difficult. When I teach handstands and say to them, look, just stare at a spot on the ground, they literally have to stare at the spot of the ground. And I say, no, when you're doing it, you're staring into space, but you are focusing on how the sensations feel in the body, on the hands, how the subtle shifts in the feet and the hips will cause you to either underbalance or overbalance, things like that, and it's just being present and relaxed in that state. And yeah, it's quite interesting how handstands are very mindful. I don't know how far you are with your handstand journey, but I don't know if you remember when you first get that feeling of balancing, it's not what you expected it to be like. When you first start your journey, you expect it to be a certain way. And it's the same as when I learned how to press into a handstand. I expected the press to feel a particular way around the abdominals, like you feel the compression itself. All it feels like your legs are just going to pop up by themselves without even having any sensation. So it's amazing when we can probably get into the philosophy of this another time. And maybe I really want Kit Lachlan to be a part of this because I remember the podcast that you did with Kit and with Jeff, and I listened to that podcast twice actually in the last lockdown that we had here, and I was thinking to myself, it would be amazing to go deeper into this aspect because I come from that background, that sort of Eastern background. I've been brought up in that background, surrounded by monks and their teachings, and it's only just in the last 2 or 3 years I've really fully appreciated what they meant by stillness, and I've applied that stillness towards my approach to life in terms of business, my teaching of my clients. And you can ask Jacob if you ever get into a conversation, but he'll have a client, and we had this morning, he'll have a client and he'll be training him, he'll have 2 clients within the space of 2 hours, and I'll still be on that first client, or I'll just be like sat there stretching for like 2 hours. So stuff like that, you slow everything down and the world just becomes completely different, and you see a different light to the world when you look at the world in that beautiful way.
Everyone's in a rush. You're teaching them to slow down, take a breath.
Yeah, and flexibility is something you don't want to rush.
No.
Right, it's been so much fun, mate. It's been a pleasure to have you on. I've got to do a part 2 with you. And definitely, hopefully this will invite Kit, and maybe he'll watch it, because I've been trying to get in touch with him. We've tried to schedule something, and I don't think it's worked out because obviously he's a busy guy. And hopefully this will give him the incentive to maybe sit down with us.
Have you reached out to Emmett? Emmett's like always down to chat.
Yeah, I've always felt intimidated because I felt like these guys are like the top, the people I've looked up to over the years. It becomes quite daunting. But it's funny because when I messaged you, when I followed you, you had the instant message on Instagram, and then we straight away got into a conversation, and you were asking how I was and how obviously my flexibility was. And I was like, well, we're having this conversation by message. Why not have it in person, in doing it as a podcast? So I'm all about long form conversations. So yeah, I think I might drop Emmett a message, and see if we can get him involved as well. And I'll definitely have you involved as well. I think it'd be nice to have a 3-way conversation and pick his brains.
Yeah, he goes deep, man.
Well, I always thought he was deep when he had his beard and his long hair. Now he's got rid of it, so I thought maybe he started a new leaf or something.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Right, bud. This has been an amazing podcast. So this is episode number 35. It's going to be in the usual areas: iTunes, Spotify, and as always, as Craig and I always mention on this podcast, please do watch us on YouTube, because the YouTube community is getting bigger now, and I think more people are into watching videos too. And this one's definitely one to watch because of the knowledge, the vast knowledge that this friend of mine is coming out with. I forgot your name there for a second. Sorry.
Rangers strength, bro.
Rangers. I read Rangers strength, and I was like, I forgot his name. I was going to call you Aaron there.
That was something we chatted about too. Is like Emmett and Jeff and I were talking about making a like avatar video game where we were just like our avatars and like splits wizard, and like that would be a pretty funny thing.
You guys into that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah,
it's all good. Like, all that stuff's fun.
Nice. Yeah, I used to be an ex-gamer, and I used to be the one gamer that used to sit cross-legged as well for 6 hours.
Yeah, those guys need flexibility work.
They do. That's an entire industry open for people to go into. With long hours of sitting on a chair, especially the leather chairs. I don't know. I know we're at the end of the podcast, but I don't know if you've ever experienced sat on a leather chair. I feel as though it really pinches my glutes. I feel like my glutes are burning if I'm sat on a leather chair, so I can't sit on anything that's leather, and I can't even sit in an L-based position for too long as well. I have to sit cross-legged, and people say, well, you've just been Indian and this and that, but it really is that. I think my body just doesn't like being sat in that position. It just automatically reverts to either a squat or sitting cross-legged.
Yeah, so I think when you actually have those muscles developed, you can't just let them relax either. Like, so I think that's part of it too. You have to sit a certain way when you're developed a certain way, and maybe entice them to barbell squat.
Yeah. What's this that you sent to me?
That's the RPE chart.
Okay, cool, nice.
You want that? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Right, we're gonna call it there. Right, so all your information will be on the post, so then that way people can get in touch with you, and definitely do try one of the range of strength training protocols and train underneath you, because I've seen all your Instagram stories where the progression videos and the pictures are incredible. So yeah, and this community is very friendly and open, so please do get in touch with us, guys, if you've got any questions about flexibility, range of motion, and just trying to get the middle split. Which seems to be the most common question that I receive.
Yeah, same, man. Well, right. The thing is that it's attainable. It's obtainable, guys.
It is, yeah.
And
as much as gymnastics coaches say it isn't, it's definitely obtainable.
It is for sure. And I think the community we've created, a real movement, showcases that. You got people touching their calves to the floor like every week. It feels like it's crazy. But the importance of that community and learning through osmosis and just being in the environment is super, super important. And no one ever did anything great by themselves.
No, 100%. Right, we're done there. We'll see you in the next one, guys.